Welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritang cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishnam Ishwaram Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha Om Tava Katamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Karma Shapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadattatam Bhuvi Grinanti ye Bhurida Janaha. So we are on July 22nd, 1883, and in the middle of page 268. This was a Sunday, I believe. It was, Sunday, July 22nd. And so, being a day off in British India, where they had assumed the British weekend system, devotees were able to come today. So Sri Ramakrishna is in the midst of talking to the devotees, but there's a natural break in the course of the conversation, and he begins, Once 4 friends, in the course of a walk, saw a place enclosed by a wall. The wall was very high. They all became eager to know what was inside. One of them climbed to the top of the wall. What he saw on looking inside made him speechless with wonder. He only cried, "Ah, ah," and dropped in. He could not give any information about what he saw. The others too climbed the wall, uttered the same cry, "Ah, ah," and jumped in. Now who could tell what was inside? Sages like Bharata and Dattatreya, after realizing Brahman, could not describe it. A man's eye completely disappears when he goes into samadhi after attaining the knowledge of Brahman. That is why Ram Prasad sang, addressing his mind, "If you should find the task too hard, call upon Ram Prasad for help." So now let me stop for a minute and go back to the story he just told about the 4 friends who were passing by a high wall around an enclosure. They didn't know what was inside, but they heard sounds of merriment coming from inside. So one of them climbed up and saw what was inside and was struck with such wonder, he jumped inside with a shout of wonder. And then another did the same. And so who is going to say what is on the other side? Now it's interesting here that he tells part of the story, and that part which is applicable to the illustration he's giving here. Normally, we know the story, the full version of the longer version of the story, is that one after another they would climb to the top and say, well, I'll find out what's inside and I'll come back and tell you. But then they're struck with such wonder at what they see that they forget everything, jump inside with a shout of joy and don't come back. So the fourth said, well, I will come back and tell others. The four friends, the other three had already gone, but he decides that I will go, makes a firm determination, come back to tell others what he saw. And so he climbs the wall and then sees what's inside. Then he comes back and tells others. And so in that full version of the story, Sri Ramakrishna is illustrating the role of the avatara Purusha, the incarnation of God, attains to the knowledge of Brahman, to the knowledge of God, and then returns to tell humanity about it. How did we get the scriptures that we have in the world? How did we get the knowledge of God? It could only come from those who had experienced God. And so there have been a succession of great souls, extraordinary souls, who attained to the knowledge of God, but came back and told humanity about it. And that is the role of the incarnation. There are others who do that, like in recent history, people like Ramana Maharshi, who had the highest experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but he lived on for many years. At first, he remained completely silent. He never said anything. But then after some years, I forget how many years, but after a number of years of complete silence, he began to speak. And after that, he wouldn't speak much, but he would give instruction to others, tell them about the nature of the truth. And so both incarnations of God and specially competent adhikarika purushas. Adhikarika means specially competent, with a special authority, as Sri Ramakrishna would say, those who are commanded by God to return and tell humanity about their experience. That is how we know. Otherwise, if this is all that we see, this is all that we know, how would we know about the existence of God? How would we know about the spiritual path? So here, Sri Ramakrishna is not talking about the incarnation. He's talking about the inexpressible nature of the truth, and how people, after experiencing that truth, they couldn't describe what it was that they saw. So here, the part of the story that is pertinent, and therefore the shortened version that he tells, is just the fact that when one sees the marvel of reality, one is struck dumb. One can't speak, it can't be described. And even Sri Ramakrishna, being an incarnation, even he couldn't describe it. He would come back, and sometimes he would try to tell them what it was he experienced in Samadhi, and he couldn't, because no words can express it. So that's interesting, because he had the knowledge, he had the experience, and that experience was still there. When he came back down from that experience, the imprint of that experience was still there. The knowledge coming from that experience was still there, but he couldn't put it into words. And so it's not that he couldn't put it into words because it's too confusing, or because people can't understand, or couldn't understand, or whatever. It's because that there are no words to describe it. There's no way. Dualistic language with its subjects and objects, and verb tenses with time and all of that, that which is beyond time and space, beyond duality, beyond relationship, how could you possibly put that into language? So that's the point that he's making here. And so he just tells about the men climbing to the top of the wall, being struck with wonder and jumping in, and unable to come back to express what it is that they saw. And so when we eventually come close enough to God, that is usually what happens to us. We get so close, and the attraction, the beauty, the wonder, the love, all of that is so close that everything else is forgotten, and we plunge in. Not because of a death wish, not because we're suicidal, not because we're sick of existence, not because we don't have control of ourselves. But when a person comes to that point, then one sees that that is reality. I've lived in a life of unreality and a life of pain and suffering. Why? You don't even think, why would I want to go back to that? You run into reality itself, merge into it. We're not thereby lost. One of these days I have to look up the poem and memorize a good English translation of it because it's so beautiful. But there's a poem by the famous Rumi, the great Sufi poet Rumi, where he says that the refrain is, "What did I ever lose by dying?" And he says that I was a mineral, I died, and I became plant. I was a plant and I died and I became animal. I was an animal and I died and I became human. I was human and I died and I became one with the beloved. What did I ever lose by dying? But the way he phrases it, even in English translation, is very, very beautiful. The idea being that when the drop enters the ocean, the dropness is lost, yes, but the drop gains the ocean. So if a drop gains the ocean, does it think, "Oh, why did I let go of my dropness? I could have remained a drop forever. Why did I lose that?" No, no, you rush to join into the ocean, to become the ocean. If you're small and insignificant and you plunge into the ocean of meaning, the ocean of truth, the ocean of bliss, the ocean of joy, the ocean of love, the ocean of everything that is real, do you think, "Oh, why did I leave my little personality with all of its flaws behind? I want to go back to that." No, you don't think that at all. So you plunge into the ocean of God. Or it's sometimes expressed that it's like the love of the moth for the flame. The moth plunges into the flame, giving up its life in the flame for love of the flame. And of course, that's a poetic expression. That's not a scientific expression of why the moth plunges into the flame, but it is a beautiful poetic expression. And it is true to experience of the spiritual aspirant that we see the fire of God and we plunge into it, burning all the dross away, all of the limitation away, so that we remain as pure gold, the gold of the divine being. So again, that's the idea that he's expressing here. And then he says that sages like Jarabharata and Dattatreya, after realizing Brahman, they couldn't express what it was that they saw. And he goes on, the mind must completely merge itself in knowledge, but that is not enough. Ram Prasad, again, he quoted that couplet from Ram Prasad's song. Ram Prasad, that is, the principle of I, must vanish too. Then alone does one get the knowledge of Brahman. So the mind has to merge itself in knowledge, that is, in the experience of the truth. And the I, the individual I, that which separates me from everything else, that has to go also. I've told this story several times in lectures from other, illustrating other points, but I haven't told it for a long time, so let me tell it again now. That Ramana Maharshi once had scolded a woman devotee for something in the morning. And so she stewed about it all day. Why did he scold me? Didn't really do anything wrong. It was a misunderstanding. Well, why is he doing? Why did he embarrass me in front of others and correct me and all of that? She went on stewing about that all day. And so in the evening, she couldn't stand it anymore. So she said to Maharshi, that, "Oh, sir, why is it that you scolded me this morning? I didn't really do anything wrong." And Ramana Maharshi said, "Why do you blame me for what you saw in your dream?" So now, someone like me can't say that. If I scold someone and they get upset and they ask me why I scolded them, I can't say that because I'm not yet Ramana Maharshi. But he could say that because he saw that for him, there was no I, as there was not also for Sri Ramakrishna. That they had both transcended the I consciousness. There was no I there. And so Ramana Maharshi saw that each of us is living within our own dream. Our minds are projecting a world of experience. And yes, our worlds intersect, but she was responsible for what she saw, and Ramana Maharshi had no sense of agency then or at any time. He had no sense of agency. Other people, like this woman, saw him doing things, saying things, and so they assumed that there was an ordinary sense of human agency behind it. But for Ramana Maharshi, the ego was completely gone. The body and mind just operated under the dynamic power of Prakriti, of nature. There was no involvement of the ego that I am going to do this and I am going to do that. So the mind must completely merge itself in knowledge, in the knowledge that I am Brahman. But that is not enough. The principle of I must vanish too. Then alone does one get the full knowledge of Brahman, when the I has been transcended. So in Vedanta, we put a lot of emphasis on the self and on self-knowledge. But we put emphasis on the self and seeking the source of the I, the sense of I am. We put a great deal of emphasis on the fact that each of us has this intuition that I am. We can express it in language, I am, but that's an expression of an internal intuition we have of self-existence. But that sense, but the individual I am, that disappears into the infinite I am. And when there is only one non-dual reality, nothing else whatsoever, no diversity whatsoever, the I am also disappears. That which the I am is indicating, that remains, the reality remains. But the experience I am, that disappears. And so Swami Vivekananda, in his beautiful hymn of creation, or no, his hymn to Samadhi, he talks about going to deeper and deeper layers of consciousness so that finally there's only the aham, 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 I am, I am, I am. And then he says, and finally that too merges into what no one can say, merges into the silence of the self. Because the sense of I am that each of us has, that the dog has, the cat has, the bird has, the insect has, even a plant has, that sense of I am, that is based on the intuition of my self-existence. But it's also that which divides me from everything else. My I am appears to be different from yours. But when we realize the cosmic I am, then the I amness itself disappears and what it indicates remains, the silent, indescribable reality. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna is talking about here. So then a devotee asks, Sir, is it possible then that Shukadeva did not have the ultimate knowledge? Shukadeva, of course, is the very archetype of the fully illumined soul, who was born perfect. He never entered into bondage. It said that he was born fully formed, and immediately after his birth, he just walked away. He walked into the forest naked as he was born, neither looking to the left nor to the right, aware of the highest truth. And so he is the very image of the perfected sage. So this devotee is asking that, well, is it possible that Shukadeva didn't have the highest experience of the full knowledge of Brahman? And the master says, according to some people, Shukadeva only saw and touched the ocean of Brahman. He did not dive into it. That is why he could return to the world and impart religious instruction. According to others, he returned to the world of name and form after attaining the knowledge of Brahman for the purpose of teaching others. He had to recite the Bhagavata, the Srimad Bhagavata, the famous Purana, to King Parikshit, and had to teach people in various ways. Therefore, God did not destroy his I altogether. God kept in him the ego of knowledge. And so Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother both said on occasion that some great saints in world history, in different religions, including the Hindu, some of them have heard the rumbling of the ocean of Brahman from afar. Some have gotten to within a distance of it where they can see the ocean of Brahman in the distance. Some others have come close enough to touch it, and some have taken a sip of it. But when one enters into the ocean, one becomes that, and then there's no one to return and speak about it. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna is talking about here. And so he's saying that there are two opinions, and he doesn't give his opinion here, though certainly he had one, but he's giving two opinions. One is that Shukadeva didn't merge into Brahman because he couldn't have. If he came back to teach others, if he came back to tell the Srimad Bhagavata to King Parikshit and to teach others, that he could not have merged into Brahman. He touched it, tasted it, but came back without merging into it. So that's one opinion. The other opinion is that he did merge into it, but he returned with the ego of knowledge. So Sri Ramakrishna certainly believed that Shukadeva had the ego of knowledge. That is, even Sri Ramakrishna had the ego of knowledge. Ramana Maharshi had the ego of knowledge. Sri Krishna, Sri Ram, they had the ego of knowledge. Jesus had the ego of knowledge. That is, they had all attained to God. They had realized Brahman, but they had the sense of I. Otherwise, they would not have been able to speak. They would not have been able to walk. They would not have been able to teach if there had been no I there. But such people, it's the eye of knowledge because they know that it's only an appearance. As Sri Ramakrishna used to teach, or used to say by way of teaching, that if you have a rope on the ground and you light it on fire and the rope burns up, when you look at it, it still has the form of the rope. Even though it's grayish white, it has the form of a rope. But you try to pick it up to bind something with it, and you can't. It's just ash. It falls apart. It can't bind anything. And so the ego, which has been immersed in burned in the fire of the knowledge of Brahman, such an ego is only ash. It's only an appearance. It has no power to bind the person. And so the great souls, like the Buddhas and Jesuses and Ramakrishnas of the world, they had the ego of knowledge. It was just an appearance with no binding power. Then the devotee asks, can one keep up an organization after attaining the knowledge of Brahman? Master, once I talked to Keshav Sen about the knowledge of Brahman. He asked me to explain it further. I said, if I proceed further, then you won't be able to preserve your organization and following. Keshav replied, then please stop here. All laugh. But still I said to Keshav, I and mine indicate ignorance. Without ignorance, one cannot have such a feeling as, I am the doer. These are my wife, children, possessions, name, and fame. Thereupon Keshav said, Sir, if one gave up the I, nothing whatsoever would remain. I reassured him and said, I am not asking you to give up all of the I. You should give up only the unripe I. The unripe I makes one feel, I am the doer. These are my wife and children. I am a teacher. Renounce this unripe I and keep the ripe I, which will make you feel that you are the servant of God, his devotee, and that God is the doer and you are the instrument. So this is something Sri Ramakrishna often talked about, the distinction between the unripe I and the ripe I. Because again, as long as we see a world, as long as we perceive a body, a mind operating within this world, there will be an I. Even Buddha, when he attained to nirvana under the Bodhi tree, then he addresses Mara, the Buddhist tempter, and says, O thou builder of this tabernacle, meaning the illusion of a individuality, a personhood, the body and mind complex. O thou builder of this tabernacle, no more will I believe in you and your construction, the rafters, the pole beam of ego and the rafters of this, that, and the other. And it names the different parts of the psychophysical being as being parts of the construction of Mara. But who is addressing Mara? It's the ego. But now it's the ego which has been illuminated by the experience of nirvana. And Buddha continued to teach for another 55 years, no, 45 years after his illumination at the age of 35. He continued to teach for 45 years after that. So who was teaching? It was the ego, but it was the ripe ego, the ego which had no power to bind, the ego which had been burnt by the fire of knowledge, but remained as an appearance so that the Buddha could teach humanity. And so with Jesus, so with Ramakrishna, Krishna, Rama. Uh, but Sri Ramakrishna is talking for the rest of us here also, not in such an extreme sense as the great world teachers who were fully illumined. He was telling Keshav that you don't have to give up all of the ego, give up the unripe ego. So here he's talking about not the process that happens after full illumination, if one returns to awareness of the body and mind and doesn't merge into Brahman, never to return or to be heard from again. If one returns to the body and mind, then of course the ego has been burnt, the unripe ego is destroyed forever. And what remains is just an appearance. But for us, he's telling here, as he was telling Keshav, he's telling us through Keshav, that we should give up the unripe ego and assume the ripe ego. So that, of course, is not speaking about attaining the highest experience first. No, he's telling us as spiritual aspirants to give up the sense of I am this person with these characteristics and with these possessions and with these qualifications and these degrees and this profession and with this spouse and these children and these parents and so forth. Yes, even Ramakrishna, if you asked him, he could tell you the name of his mother, he could tell you where he was born. So that memory doesn't go, but the sense that that is who I am, that goes. And so he's asking us to give up that, to change the locus of the ego. Right now, the ego is, I, Swami Atmarupananda, born on such and such a day, in such and such a place, with such and such a personal history, with these possessions and with these qualifications and those lack of qualifications, etc. That's who I am. No, we have to give that up and change the locus to, I am a child of God. Or for a jnani, I am consciousness itself. I don't have a personal identity. I am the light that illuminates all experience. But Sri Ramakrishna here is talking to devotees, and so he's speaking in a devotional sense. So give up the sense that I am this individual I think I am now, and realize that no, my real identity is I'm a child of God. I'm a child of the Divine Mother. I am a child of Sri Ramakrishna, for the devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. That is my identity. That identity won't hurt us. No, it's not the same as the ego of knowledge of the realized soul, but it is an approximation toward that, and it is of great benefit to us if we can begin to move in that direction. Whenever that sense of personal identity that I am this and these are my things and that this is who I am, when that asserts itself and we catch it asserting itself, to think, no, I'm a child of God. And just multiple times a day, whenever we remember to do it, to pray to our Ishta, our chosen ideal, to pray to God, however we conceive of God. Please, I surrender to you. Please accept me and keep me as your own. May my identity be with you, not with anything else, with no other association. So again, it doesn't mean that you forget who you are and you forget where you live and you don't recognize your car anymore and you go to somebody else's car and try to drive that away, or you go to somebody else's house not knowing which is your house. No, there's no such confusion. But you begin to know that whatever these factors of this little life pertaining to this body and mind, my real identity is that I belong to God. I'm a child of God, and that's where I belong. It's said of the great Nag Mahashai the householder disciple, one of the householder disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, extraordinary saint. He would be, if it weren't for the fact that he was born in the midst of the Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Swami Vivekananda, and others, if he had been born at some other time in history as just an individual, he would be recognized as one of the great saints of the world, an extraordinary saint, extraordinary saint. But it's said that from his childhood, he would look at the stars and think that I don't really belong here. I don't belong here. This isn't where I'm from. He had this sense from early childhood that this is not where I belong. And then gradually he learned where he did belong, that his identity was a spiritual identity. No, he didn't belong here. He belonged in the heart of truth. He belonged in the heart of God. So that's what we want, and that's what he's telling Keshav here. So the devotee asks, can the ripe I form an organization? Master, I said to Keshav that the I that says, I am a leader, I have formed this party or organization, I am teaching people, is the unripe I. It is very difficult to preach religion. It is not possible to do so without receiving a commandment of God. The permission of God is necessary. Shukadeva had a command from God to recite the Bhagavata. If after realizing God, a man gets his command and becomes a preacher or teacher, then that preaching or teaching does no harm. His eye is not unripe, but it is ripe. And so, again, he was trying to teach Keshav, because Keshav was a good man. Sri Ramakrishna loved him. He was a very intelligent man, very famous, but he was a good man. He wasn't one who was puffed up with his world fame, and he was known worldwide. A very, very famous man, one of the most famous people in all of India at that time. And yet he was a sincere devotee of God. And so Sri Ramakrishna was always instructing him, trying to get him to go deeper. And Keshav did gradually go deeper, but it was a struggle for him because he had also that sense of a ego of being a leader, of being a teacher, of being an organizer, etc. In fact, once Sri Ramakrishna tells, I think it's somewhere in the Gospel, I forget where someone was praising Keshav in Sri Ramakrishna's presence, saying that you, Keshav, are Jesus, you are Sri Chaitanya. And then Keshav smiles and says, then who is he, to Sri Ramakrishna? But Keshav had some ego, and that's why he didn't dissuade his disciple from speaking that way about him. He was somewhat embarrassed to be spoken of that way in front of Sri Ramakrishna, but he couldn't bring himself to say, no, I'm not. Sri Ramakrishna, who was, we believe, and he believed, an incarnation of God, if someone called him that, he would say, no, I'm the dust of the devotee's feet. I'm a nobody. But Keshav couldn't yet bring himself to that point. Maybe by the end of his life, through Sri Ramakrishna's grace, he could, but at least not. If he got there, it was only at the end of his life. So, and also we should understand from this what happened to Swami Vivekananda. Swamiji had to go around the world, struggle so much. You look at Swamiji's life. It's so full of drama. It would make a wonderful movie, a tremendous movie, because it's so full of drama, as the life of Sri Ramakrishna is. Holy Mother's life, you couldn't make much of a movie of her life. You could, but it would take extraordinary skill to make a good life of Holy Mother, because her life was so quiet and so hidden. It would take a much greater skill to bring out the beauty of her life. But with Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji, both of their lives were so full of drama. But in Swamiji's life, there was so much struggle, and he had to contend with the opposition of the missionaries. He had to contend with the opposition of his own countrymen. He had to fight. He had to struggle every inch of the way. He had to struggle. He had to establish himself here in a foreign country. So many things he had to face and confront. And that was only possible, because Sri Ramakrishna had drawn a veil over his mind so that he had a sense of individuality. Even Swamiji had a ripe eye because he knew who he was, because he had at least tasted Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Not immersed himself in it as Sri Ramakrishna did for 6 months, but he had at least tasted it. He had come to the shore of Nirvikalpa Samadhi and tasted it. But then when he came back, Sri Ramakrishna said that the Divine Mother, which meant Sri Ramakrishna, had drawn a veil over his mind, and he would not get that knowledge of non-duality back until he had finished his work. Why? Because someone like Sri Ramakrishna could not have organized the Ramakrishna mission. He could not have gone to America and struggled with the missionaries. He could not have struggled with his own countrymen who were trying to bring him down and destroy the new movement. It took someone who had a sense of purpose and a sense of agency in order to do that. And so Swami Vivekananda's sense of agency and sense of personhood was highly refined, not like ours. And yet, he had a sense of agency, which allowed him to do the organization and things that Sri Ramakrishna could not have done. So he continues, Sri Ramakrishna, I asked Keshav to give up this unripe I, the ego that feels I am the servant of God and lover of God does not injure anyone. I said to Keshav, you have been constantly talking of your organization and your followers. See, he was full of his sense of being a great leader and things. So you have been constantly talking of your organization and your followers, but people also go away from your organization. Keshav answered, it is true, sir. After staying in it several years, people go to another organization. What is worse, on deserting me, they abuse me right and left. Then Sri Ramakrishna said, why don't you study their nature? Is there any good in making anybody and everybody a disciple? So Sri Ramakrishna often referred to this in talking about Keshav and the Brahmo Samaj and talking to other leaders of the Brahmo Samaj. He said that you don't test your disciples. You take anyone and everyone. And so you end up, your organization ends up dividing into factions. People come and people go, people abuse you and all of that. You should select your disciples. And that, of course, is what we see Sri Ramakrishna did. I said to Keshav further, you should accept the Divine Mother, the primal energy. Because again, the Brahmo Samajis, they accepted a personal Brahman, not the impersonal absolute that they didn't accept. They accepted a Western form of a monotheistic God as the highest reality, God, a personal God like the monotheistic God of Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And so he says, you should accept the Divine Mother, the primal energy. Brahman is not different from its Shakti. What is Brahman is also Shakti. As long as a man remains conscious of the body, he is conscious of duality. It is only when a man tries to describe what he sees that he finds duality. And Sri Ramakrishna continues, telling the people gathered around him, Keshav later on recognized Kali. So yes, Keshav grew a lot under the mentorship of Sri Ramakrishna. He grew a great deal under the guidance of Sri Ramakrishna. So there were things along the way that he couldn't accept, but there were many things he did accept, and he did grow a great deal. And so Sri Ramakrishna, seeing his sincerity, had great love for Keshav. Among all of the followers and leaders of Brahmo Samaj, I should say, among all the leaders of Brahmo Samaj, he had the greatest love by far for Keshav and saw in him great spiritual potential. But again, he was held back by his sense of importance, his sense of being a leader, of being a teacher, trying to hold an organization together, and so forth. So one day when Keshav was here with his disciples, I said to him that I would like to hear him preach. He delivered a lecture in the Chandni, that is the portico outside. He delivered a lecture in the Chandni. Then we all sat by the bathing ghat and had a long conversation. I said to him, "It is Bhagavan alone who in one form appears as Bhakta and in another as the Bhagavata. Please repeat, Bhagavata, Bhakta, Bhagavan." Keshav and his disciples repeated the words. Then I asked him to repeat, Guru, Krishna, Vaishnava. Thereupon Keshav said, "Sir, I should not go so far now. People will say that I have become an Orthodox Hindu." And so Brahmo Samaj was formed as a reaction to two things, Orthodox Hinduism and the Christian missionaries. Under the influence of English education and the preaching of Western missionaries, they had become ashamed of their gods and goddesses, of their rituals, and what they perceived as the backwardness of Indian civilization when they saw the great technological advances and the power and the external majesty of the British Raj. And so they looked for some form of, some way of salvaging a form of Hinduism which would match better with what they thought was the glory of Christianity and of Western civilization. And so the Brahmo Samaj was a reaction and a reform of Hinduism, but they were definitely not Orthodox Hindus, didn't want to be seen as Orthodox Hindus at all. So Sri Ramakrishna asked him to say Bhagavata, Bhakta, Bhagavan. And that Keshav said, because Bhagavata meaning the scripture, Bhakta the devotee, and Bhagavan God. So Sri Ramakrishna had had a vision once many years before, in front of the Vishnu temple at Dakshineshwar, where he saw a Pandit sitting in front of the temple on the top of the steps on the veranda of the temple, sitting there with the Srimad Bhagavatam, the scripture in front of him, reciting it. And in the vision, he saw that he actually saw, that was actually there. But the vision was, he saw a light come from the heart of the Radha Krishna statue, it come from Krishna, from the heart of Krishna, a light come, touch the scripture, and then go to the heart of the Pandit who is reciting the Bhagavata. And such experiences, they're not visual experiences. There's the visual element where he saw the light coming from the heart, touching the scripture, and then going to the devotee's heart. So that he saw with his eyes. It was a spiritual vision. It wasn't something other people would have seen, only he saw it. But a real vision conveys meaning. And that's the intent of the vision. It's not the light that you see, it's the meaning conveyed by that. And so the meaning conveyed to him was, and this knowledge would have flashed in his mind. It wouldn't have been debatable. It wouldn't have been discussable. It was the knowledge that came through this vision that the deity, the scripture, and the devotee are parts of the same reality. And so Keshav was able to recite that. I'm sure certainly he didn't accept it in a non-dualistic sense, but he accepted it in the sense that they're all intimately connected. But then when Sri Ramakrishna asked him to recite this other trinity, there were several trinities like this that Sri Ramakrishna would speak about as being one, Guru, Krishna, Vaishnava. That he couldn't say because, first of all, the Brahmo Samaj didn't accept the idea of a guru. They had leaders, but leaders were like Protestant ministers or something like that. Just a position, an organizational position, nothing more. So they didn't accept the idea, the tradition of the guru. They didn't accept deities, and so they didn't accept Krishna. And they didn't accept the teachings of a Orthodox Hindu sect like the Vaishnavas. So on all three counts, that one Keshav Chandra Sen couldn't say. Mentioning Guru, Krishna, Vaishnava, then that would be accepting a huge mass of Orthodox Hinduism, and that he was not prepared to do. Then Sri Ramakrishna continues, it is extremely difficult to go beyond the three gunas. One cannot reach that state without having realized God. Man dwells in the realm of Maya. Maya does not permit him to see God. It has made him a victim of ignorance. Once Hriday brought a bull calf here to Dakshineshwar. I saw one day that he had tied it with a rope in the garden so that it might graze there. I asked him, Hriday, why do you tie that calf here every day? Uncle, he said, I'm going to send this calf to our village. When it grows strong, I shall yoke it to the plow. As soon as I heard these words, I was stunned to think, how inscrutable is the play of the divine Maya. Kamarpukur and Sihor are so far away from Calcutta. Sihor was the village where Hriday was from, very close to Kamarpukur. Kamarpukur and Sihor are so far away from Calcutta. This poor calf must go all that way. Then it will grow, and at length it will be yoked to the plow. This is indeed the world. This is indeed Maya. I fell down unconscious. Only after a long time did I regain consciousness. So this is one of my favorite incidents in the gospel, and I mentioned it many times, not because it's the most profound or anything. It is profound, but not the most profound. First, let me say that at the end, where Sri Ramakrishna says that thinking this, I fell down unconscious, and only after a long time I regained consciousness. We have to understand that for Sri Ramakrishna, losing consciousness doesn't mean like us. It wasn't that he needed smelling salts or something like that to bring him back to consciousness, or that he had completely lapsed into a state of actual unconsciousness of everything, as we might if we're knocked unconscious, or if we faint, where everything just disappears, but there's nothing there. For Sri Ramakrishna, he would have, thinking about the inscrutable nature of Maya, he would have gone into a type of state where that was the content of it. Again, he wouldn't have gone unconscious, he would have gone into an altered conscious state. Because for Sri Ramakrishna, even sleep was not sleep. But anyway, this story, I'm very fond of it because it shows again why Swami Vivekananda was necessary, as I was talking earlier today. That Sri Ramakrishna, when he saw Hriday with the calf, and Hriday said, I'm going to take it to my village and fatten it, and then I'm going to yoke it to the plow. Then Sri Ramakrishna, in one version of this, he says, so much calculation, and fell down unconscious. So Sri Ramakrishna, thinking so far into the future, planning, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do that, that was impossible for him. He lived now. He didn't keep anything for the future. He didn't think about the future. He saw reality was in the here and now for him, and time itself was an illusion. And so how could such a mind form an organization, form the Ramakrishna mission with the laws and bylaws and articles of incorporation and signing documents, buying land and all of that? How could he have done it? He couldn't have. Not because he wasn't smart enough, didn't know enough, or was too lazy, but because his mind was so absorbed in God that it couldn't be brought from there to attend to such affairs. And the very idea of so much calculation, thinking so far into the future, that I, Hriday, am going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do that, that itself put him into a state where he thought, this is Maya. This is the way the world works. What a mysterious Maya that people do so much calculation and so much planning. And he went into an altered state from that. So again, I ask, how could he have formed the Ramakrishna mission? He couldn't have. He inspired it. He gave it life, and he continues to give it life. He is the life of the Ramakrishna mission and the larger Ramakrishna movement. He's the power, he's the life, he's the wisdom that motivates all of it, but not the work that had to be done by a sense of agency, that I am going to do this. I'm going to buy a piece of land so that we have it for the Ramakrishna mission. I'm going to establish the Belar Mutt. I'm going to call a meeting and bring people together. I'm going to give people their various duties so that they can carry them out and carry forward the mission of the order. That for a person like Sri Ramakrishna was impossible. And so he had to have someone like Swami Vivekananda, who had also the natural tendency of his mind to be plunged into samadhi and remain there and not to return from there. And that's why Sri Ramakrishna had to pull a thin veil over his mind so that he would have enough sense of agency in order to do the things that had to be done for the welfare of the world. Otherwise, Sri Ramakrishna would have lived his wonderful life. Many people in his lifetime would have been inspired. Many would have attained to liberation. After his life, for some time, that would have continued for generations, for some generations, but there would have been no vehicle to preserve and to carry forward that power and direct it for the good of humankind. And that's what Swami Vivekananda was tasked with. So let me stop here. It's a good place to stop in the text. And also this will allow me, if today there are any questions, I will be able to answer questions. So I'll give announcements, and then if anyone has typed in the comment section on YouTube any questions, I will take those. So, excuse me, let me get a taste of this. So, for announcements. On Sunday, we will have question and answers. And so please, a couple of you have already sent in questions, which is good. But please, any others of you that have questions you would like answered, please send them to our email address, either to the info@houstonvedanta.org, which is on our website, or to my personal email for those of you who have it. But just put in the subject line questions or questions and answers, something indicating that this is a question for Sunday. And then I will make the talk on Sunday from those questions. So please feel free to give me questions. When I do this, when we're having in-person meetings and people come, people always tell me after the lecture that, well, Swami, I had several questions, but I didn't want to impose myself or whatever. Well, no, this is the purpose of this is for you to ask questions. So don't hold back because you think, well, maybe I'm not. Why should I ask a question? No, that's the purpose of it. So please ask questions if you have them. So that's Sunday. And then next week on Tuesday, at the usual time, 7:30 in the evening, we will continue our new study of the Isha Upanishad. Again, this past Tuesday, day before yesterday, we began the study of the Upanishads, and most of this past Tuesday was an introduction to the study itself. We only took one verse from the Isha Upanishad. And so next Tuesday, I will start with that first verse again. We'll start with that and move forward with the text itself. So that's at 7:30. And after the Isha, which is a very short Upanishad, we'll take one by one others, the Isha, Kena, Kata, etc., etc. And then next Thursday, we will continue with this class as well. Let me also mention, if any of you have need for house cleaning or for a live-in arrangement, someone asked me today, someone I know and someone whom I trust very deeply. Some of you know her, Perla. She and her husband were the caretakers. Perla herself was the caretaker of Peg Nosek, our wonderful devotee who passed away some months ago. Took care of her for 25 years. But because she and her husband, Erasmo, they were taking care of Peg for 25 years, they don't have a work history that they can show to employers in order to get, and so they're having a great difficulty. So if any of you need or you know of someone who needs, either for someone who needs like a caretaker, a live-in caretaker, or someone who, if they need someone who can come and do cleaning and things like that, please let me know and I will talk to Perla. She's, again, a person of completely trustworthy, a very good person who took care of Peg very devotedly for 25 years. So I told her today that I would at least put it out to our devotees if there's anyone who needs such help. And I believe that is it. Let me mention one other thing, and that is that we're hoping. This is not a promise, so don't hold me to it and don't get angry if we don't do it. We're hoping that at least by June, we can start having in-person meetings. So now don't suddenly hear this and then not ask anything else and suddenly appear at the first day in June for in-person meetings. But that's what we're hoping to be able to do. It looks like with the progress of the vaccination and so forth, that things may be under enough control that we can at least have socially distanced meeting here with people with masks and eventually return to normal. But as soon as we can safely, and as soon as it is recommended by doctors and scientists, then we want to be able to open for in-person meetings so that we can have you back with us here. So that right now we're thinking that we may be able to do that in June. So let us see. So, okay, the ancient tribes in America did not have the words I or my. I guess this two terms came with the development of the politics science through time. So yes, the language is very interesting. The differences in languages, like there were some Native American tribes, like the Micmac in the northeast, far northeast into Quebec and in Maine, Quebec, other places in the far northeast of the continent, who had no words for time. And so here there were some who had no words for I and mine. But there are other ways of expressing I and mine. The fact that there were no words for that shows that that was not an important consideration to them. But still, of course, they were able to function and function in a good, effective way as we do. And so there are ways of indicating that the idea of mine and the idea of I without actually having words for it. But the fact that they didn't have words for it shows that the concept itself was not important to them. And so just as among the Native American tribes, well, let me start over again and say that among the Aztecs, the Inca, the Maya, there was philosophy, there was poetry, there was advanced art, mathematics, fields of learning as we would recognize today, developed independently of Europe and Asia, but developed. So it's not that they were without what we would recognize as high civilization. The conquistadors, when they went to Mexico and to South America, they were amazed at the advancement of the civilizations they met. Those who went with Cortés to Mexico, they wrote back that they had never seen in all of Europe such beautiful cities, such advanced cities. And so they had great civilizational advancement, which was destroyed, unfortunately, destroyed, both through deliberate destruction as well as through disease. Huge numbers of people, sometimes whole tribes, were eradicated by disease and others by armaments and war. But the North American, or I should say, the tribes that were located in what's now the United States and Canada, they didn't have the technological advancement as much as those in Mexico, Central America, and in the Andes. They didn't, and also they found now that in the rainforests of Brazil, there was great advancement at one time that has been ignored for centuries. But there was a great civilizational advancement, technological advancement there. But in what we consider now the United States and Canada, the technological advancements were few. They were technologically living in the Stone Age. There we find that there was not the development of philosophy and religion as a separate study. Why? And it's what's pointed to here by Connie, that The two terms of I and mind came with the development of political science through time, etc., through politics and science through time. To develop philosophy as a discipline, it takes the conflict of different types of thought. And so, in a place like in Central America and South America, there were the meetings of different peoples and discussions and things. It takes the conflict of thought. Oh, I think this. Well, no, I think that. Well, no, I think you're wrong there. Well, no, I'm right because of this. Well, no, you're wrong because of that. That's how philosophy develops. Religion as a study. All people have been religious. The North American Indians in the United States and Canada were deeply religious. Their whole life was religious and spiritual. But they didn't have religion as a discipline because that takes disagreement among religions to help a person to define what it is I believe. Well, I think this. Well, no, we believe this other way. And we disagree and argue and refine our ideas because I have to support my ideas in the face of this person. And so, anyway, this is a long tangent, but it's something that I'm interested in. So that's why I impose it on you. So, but these ideas do come. That's why diversity of thought is a good thing, because it awakens us to our own thinking. So then another. Is there any reason why we didn't have any avatar here in America? The Book of Mormon tells a story about Christ visiting the Americas for a short time. Well, why we didn't have any avatar here in America? We might have. We don't know. Because the oral traditions and the written texts, because the Aztecs had written texts, and the Incas might have had a unique form of writing, they don't know, but they found intricately knotted threads that they think might have been a system of writing. They're not sure. But the Aztecs did have writing, the Maya did, but the books were destroyed. And so and the oral tradition was destroyed aggressively. And so we don't know. But there's one evidence of an avatar in North America. The only one I know of, well, no, there's another I'll mention. One that I know of was in the so-called Mississippi culture, which you can still see the last remnants of outside of St. Louis, Missouri. The great earthen pyramids there, huge pyramids, larger than the pyramids in Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Although it's truncated like the Central American pyramids, but the base of it is larger than the base of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And so that civilization had completely disappeared by the time the conquistadors came to that part of North America. And it had disappeared because of diseases that had preceded the conquistadors. When the conquistadors first came through the coastal regions in the Gulf Coast into Florida and the Gulf region all the way down through Texas, their diseases began to spread. And they released pigs into the environment, which they had brought for food. And the pigs carried human diseases also. And so by the time conquistadors got to the area around the Mississippi, St. Louis and the Mississippi, civilization was completely wiped out. There was nobody left. But there was the story of the great teacher who had come to these people and had taught them spirituality, taught them about the divine, taught them about morality, and taught them about civilization and culture. So we don't know more of this person except that he was a great teacher of spirituality and the establisher of morality, dharma. So Sri Krishna says in the Gita that yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. Whenever, Arjuna, whenever dharma begins to decline, then I come and body myself forth. So there was such a teacher in North America. And the other, we don't know much about who Quetzalcoatl was, the great prophet who came to Mexico and Central America, but he also could have been. We don't know enough to know, but he could have been an avatar. So, and just one more, let's see. My father is old and suffering. He led a very sincere and good, God-loving life and a major source for inspiration. I feel helpless seeing him suffer. May I request your kind guidance on that? I'm very sorry to hear that. Very sorry to hear about the suffering of your father. To see one of our own who has been of great importance to us, to see one of our own suffer. And especially a person who has been good, a person who has led a good life, who has led a devoted life, to see them suffer is extremely difficult. And so that I can't take away. That's just, that's a fact of life. And all of us, sooner or later, most of us, sooner or later, if we live long enough, we have to see that, see those that we love and people who are very good, see them suffer before they pass away, or even other than passing away, seeing them suffer. So the only thing that I can say is that, first of all, it's natural to be sad about it. You can pray for them, because prayer does help. Not the best prayer is not pray, make him get well and come back to us, because that's telling God what is best for your father when you don't know what is best for your father. So pray for his welfare. Pray that the best, what he needs to go forward, that be done. That we not take away from that which he needs to experience, but pray that he have strength, pray that your father have strength, pray that he have light, and pray that what is best for him happen. And know that all of us are on a karmic path. And so even those, and I've seen it with the Swamis who led very devout lives, very good lives, never hurt anybody, but sometimes they had to suffer a great deal before dying also. That's because we come into this life with the karma of many past lives. And before we can finish our journey here, the karma which led to this life has to unwind itself. As Holy Mother said, when you take different colored strings and tie them together and wind it up into a ball, then when you unwind it, you get the same colored strings one after the other coming out. So by that she meant that our karma are the different colored strings, the various actions we do, actions of different colors. They're tied together one after another, our various deeds. But when that is unwinding, either at the end of life naturally or through spiritual progress, either way, when that ball unwinds, the same color strings come back. And mixed in there are strings from past lives as well. So we don't know what causes a particular person's suffering, but we know that that has its purpose. It has its purpose, it has its value in the longer trajectory of the person's life. And so that doesn't make it easier to see, but it doesn't make it nice to see at all. So I'm not taking away from the seriousness of it, but it does at least allow us to see that there must be a meaning in this, that he's going through this because there's something that has to be worked out. And once it's worked out, then he will be free of that, either in life if he continues living, or in death if it ends in his passing away. So with that, I will close. I'll give a closing chant, but first let me wish all of you well. I'm glad to see the greetings from people here in the comments also from my friends, and good questions, all of you, and I wish you all well. So. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama.